I still remember the sound of the rain hitting the window pane that night, a steady, rhythmic thrumming that usually brought me a sense of peace. My apartment was a small two-bedroom place on the third floor of an old brick building just outside of downtown Chicago. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a sanctuary I had worked 2 jobs to afford. The hardwood floors creaked in familiar places, the radiator hummed a low, comforting song, and the scent of old wood and vanilla candles always welcomed me home. But that night, the air felt different. It felt heavy, thick with a tension I couldn't quite identify, but could feel deep in my chest. Marcus had been my best friend since our freshman year at Ohio State. We had shared cramped dorm rooms, survived terrible finals weeks on a diet of cheap ramen and energy drinks, and navigated the messy, confusing transition into adulthood together. He was the brother I never had. When his life fell apart 3 months ago, his girlfriend of 4 years leaving him out of the blue and taking their shared apartment with her, there wasn't even a question in my mind about what to do. I told him to pack his bags and come stay with me. He could take the couch or the spare room I used as an office for as long as he needed to get back on his feet. That's just what you do for the people you love. My girlfriend Chloe had been incredibly supportive of the arrangement at first. She and I had been dating for 3 years, and we were already talking about moving in together when my current lease ended. She was a graphic designer, full of vibrant energy and a sharp, witty humor that had captivated me from the moment we met at a local coffee shop. She knew how much Marcus meant to me, and she welcomed him into our dynamic without hesitation. For the first few weeks, it actually felt great. We'd order large pizzas on Friday nights, crack open a few local craft beers, and watch football or bad reality TV until the early hours of the morning. It felt like an extension of the good old days, a temporary bubble of comfort in the middle of our demanding adult lives. But bubbles always burst. As the weeks stretched into months, I started noticing subtle shifts in the atmosphere. It wasn't anything blatant, just a series of tiny, almost imperceptible changes that you only catch if you're looking closely. It started with the way Chloe would stay late at my place, even on weeknights when I had an early shift at the logistics firm the next morning. I'd be exhausted, pulling the covers over my shoulders, and she'd still be out in the living room, her laugh echoing down the short hallway as she chatted with Marcus. When I'd mention it the next day, she'd just smile and said she was glad she was making my best friend feel welcome during such a hard time in his life. I felt like a jerk for even letting a flicker of annoyance cross my mind. Marcus was hurting, and Chloe was just being the amazing, empathetic woman I fell in love with. Then came the changes in Marcus. The heavy, despondent cloud that had hung over him when he first arrived began to lift, replaced by a strange, nervous energy. He started working out more, buying new clothes, and splashing on expensive cologne before heading out for what he claimed were job interviews or casual drinks with old coworkers. Yet, whenever I asked how the job hunt was going, he'd get uncharacteristically defensive, brushing it off with a quick, "Just waiting to hear back, man. The market is brutal right now." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my brother. The week leading up to that rainy Tuesday had been absolute hell at work. A major shipping contract had fallen through, and as a senior operations manager, the fallout landed squarely on my shoulders. I was pulling 12-hour days, drowning in spreadsheets, conference calls, and angry emails from corporate. By Tuesday afternoon, my eyes were burning from staring at monitors, and a low, throbbing headache had taken root behind my temples. At around 7 in the evening, my boss looked at me, sighed, and told me to just go home, get some sleep, and face the rest of the mess in the morning. I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my leather briefcase, tossed my damp trench coat over my arm, and practically ran to my car. The drive home was a blur of sweeping windshield wipers and red brake lights reflecting off the wet asphalt. All I wanted was to crawl into bed, pull the blackout curtain shut, and let the world disappear for a few hours. I didn't text Chloe or Marcus to let them know I was leaving early. My phone battery had died about an hour prior, and honestly, I didn't think it mattered. It was my apartment, after all. I figured Marcus would probably be playing video games or heating up some leftover Thai food, and Chloe would be at her own place across town, working on her latest freelance project. I parked my sedan in my usual tight spot in the alleyway behind the building. The rain was coming down harder now, huge droplets splashing into the puddles and soaking through the canvas of my sneakers as I jogged toward the back entrance. I unlocked the heavy security door, walked up the 3 flights of concrete stairs, and finally stood outside the door of apartment 3B. I could hear the faint sound of music playing from inside, something slow, atmospheric, and jazzy. It was a playlist I recognized immediately because Chloe had made it for our anniversary dinner the year before. A strange, cold prickle of confusion rippled across the back of my neck. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my keyring, and slid the silver key into the deadbolt. I turned it slowly, trying to be quiet so I wouldn't startle Marcus if he was engrossed in something. The lock clicked open with a muted thud. I pushed the door open, stepping into the small entryway, and immediately smelt the scent of rich, simmering garlic, olive oil, and rosemary. Someone was cooking a serious meal. "Hey, Marcus," I called out, my voice sounding raspy and tired in the quiet space. There was no answer, but the music suddenly cut off, leaving a vacuum of heavy, dead silence in its place. I dropped my briefcase onto the small bench by the door and kicked off my wet shoes. As I walked past the kitchen, I noticed 2 wine glasses sitting on the counter, one of them stained with a deep red residue, alongside an open, half-empty bottle of expensive Cabernet. The stovetop was warm, a pan of garlic herb chicken resting on the back burner. A heavy weight settled into the pit of my stomach. My mind, exhausted from days of stress, struggled to piece together the clues that my instincts were already screaming at me to understand. I walked down the narrow, dimly lit hallway toward my bedroom, thinking maybe Marcus had a date over and had used my kitchen to impress her. I felt a brief flash of irritation that he hadn't checked with me first, but that irritation instantly froze into pure, icy dread as I approached the half-open door of my own master bedroom. The door was ajar by just a few inches, allowing a sliver of warm, golden light from the bedside lamp to spill out on the dark hallway floor. And then I heard it. A soft, breathless laugh that I would recognize anywhere in the world. It was Chloe's laugh, but it didn't possess the bright, casual ring it usually had when we were joking around. This was intimate, low, confident. My heart began to hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird, each thud echoing loudly in my ears. I stood there, paralyzed, my hand hovering inches from the brass doorknob. The rational part of my brain was desperately screaming for me to turn around, to believe there was some innocent explanation, to protect myself from whatever was on the other side of that wood. But my feet wouldn't move. I couldn't breathe. With a trembling hand, I pushed the door open the rest of the way. The sight that greeted me froze the blood in my veins, a stark, hyper-realistic nightmare that instantly shattered the foundation of my entire life. The golden light from the bedside lamp cast long, dancing shadows across the room, illuminating the 2 people I trusted most in the world, tangled together beneath my navy blue comforter. Marcus's back was to me, his broad shoulders rising and falling with heavy, rhythmic breaths, while Chloe's fingers were buried deep in his dark hair. Her eyes were closed, a serene, blissful expression on her face that I hadn't seen in months. In that split second, the world seemed to lose all sound. The hum of the radiator, the pouring rain outside, the very beat of my own heart. Everything vanished, replaced by a roaring, static white noise that filled my head. My briefcase, my stressful job, the exhaustion that had been weighing down my eyelids just 10 minutes ago, all of it evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp adrenaline that made my fingertips go completely numb. I felt like a ghost standing at the foot of my own bed, watching a tragedy unfold in an alternate reality. Then, Chloe's eyes fluttered open. For a fraction of a second, her gaze remained soft, lost in the moment. But as her eyes drifted past Marcus's shoulder and locked onto me standing in the doorway, the softness vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. The color drained from her face so fast, she looked like she might pass out. Her lips parted, but no sound came out, just a faint, ragged gasp that finally broke the spell holding Marcus in place. Sensing her sudden stiffness, Marcus paused and turned his head toward the door. When our eyes met, his jaw dropped, and a look of profound guilt and panic washed over his features. He scrambled backward, pulling the sheet up with him, his hands shaking violently as he tried to find his footing on the mattress. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with the weight of an ultimate,
irreversible betrayal. "Get out," I whispered. My voice didn't sound like my own. It was low, hollow, and devoid of any warmth or inflection. It was the sound of a man who had just watched his entire world burn to the ground and had nothing left to lose.
"Liam, wait, please, it's not what it looks like," Chloe stammered, her voice cracking, as she clutched the blanket to her chest. It was the most cliché, insulting line she could have possibly chosen, and it sparked a sudden, blinding flash of fury deep within my chest. "It's not what it looks like," I repeated, my voice rising, shaking with a volatile mixture of rage and agonizing grief. "You are in my bed, with my best friend, the man I let into my home, and man I fed. Don't you dare look me in the eye and tell me it's not what it looks like." Marcus was frantically grabbing his clothes from the floor, his face bright red as he struggled to pull his jeans on. He wouldn't look at me. The guy who had stood by my side at graduation, the guy who had promised to be the best man at my wedding one day, couldn't even raise his eyes to meet mine. "Liam, man, I am so sorry," he muttered, his voice trembling. "We didn't mean for this to happen. It just happened." "Don't call me man," I spat, stepping forward into the room. Marcus flinched, holding his hands up defensively as if he thought I was going to hit him. Honestly, a part of me wanted to. Every primal instinct in my body was screaming at me to tear him apart, to vent the unendurable pain in my chest through physical violence. But as I looked at him, shivering, pathetic, and covered in a layer of sweat and guilt, the urge to fight suddenly died, replaced by a deep, overwhelming disgust. "Pack your things. All of them."
If you are not out of this apartment in 10 minutes, I am throwing everything you own out the window into the alley. Marcus didn't argue. He grabbed his duffel bag from the closet, stuffing his clothes into it with chaotic, frantic movements. He didn't look at Chloe, and he certainly didn't look at me. Within 3 minutes, he was zipped up, his boots hastily tied, dragging his life out of my apartment. The heavy slam of the front door echoing down the hallway felt like the first nail in the coffin of my past. Then there was only Chloe. She had wrapped herself in a silk robe she kept at my place, sitting on the edge of the mattress with her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. The tears looked real, the distress felt genuine, but I couldn't find a single ounce of sympathy for her in my heart. The woman I loved, the woman I planned a future with, had become a complete stranger to me in the span of a single evening. "How long?" I asked, walking over to the window and staring out into the dark, rain-slicked streets of Chicago. The city looked cold, indifferent to the destruction that had just taken place inside apartment 3B. "Liam, please," she cried, her voice muffled by her hands. "How long, Chloe?" I demanded, turning around to face her, my arms crossed tightly over my chest to keep myself from shaking. "I want the truth. For once in the last 3 months, give me the absolute truth." She swallowed hard, wiping her nose with the back of her hand, her eyes red and swollen. 2 weeks, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. "It started 2 weeks ago. We were just talking, and we drank too much wine, and things got out of hand. I swear, Liam, I wanted to tell you, the guilt has been eating me alive every single day." A bitter, cynical laugh escaped my throat. "Guilt? You didn't look very guilty when I walked in here. You looked happy. You looked comfortable." I walked over to the dresser, grabbing her car keys and her purse, and tossed them onto the bed next to her. "Go home, Chloe." "Liam, let's talk about this, please. Don't do this right now. We're both emotional," she begged, standing up and reaching out to touch my arm. I stepped back, avoiding her touch as if her skin were venomous. "There is nothing left to talk about. You broke it. You broke us. You broke my trust. And you took away the only sanctuary I had. I want you out of my sight before I say something I'll actually regret." Seeing the cold, unyielding wall I had put up, Chloe finally realized that no amount of tears or explanations was going to fix this tonight. She silently gathered the rest of her things, her movements slow and defeated. She dressed in the bathroom, and when she walked out, she looked at me one last time, hoping for some flicker of hesitation or regret in my eyes. She found nothing but an empty, dead stare. When the front door clicked shut for the second time, The apartment fell into a terrifying, absolute silence. I stood in the middle of my living room, surrounded by the remnants of a life that no longer existed. The smell of the garlic chicken still hung in the air, a sickening reminder of the cozy, domestic evening they had planned at my expense. I walked into the kitchen, picked up the half-empty bottle of Cabernet, and poured it directly down the sink, watching the dark red liquid swirl away into the drain. I didn't sleep that night. I stripped the sheets off my bed, threw them into the trash can in the alley, and sat on the bare mattress in the dark, watching the headlights of passing cars trace slow, ghostly patterns across my ceiling. The anger had faded into a dull, throbbing ache, a profound sense of loneliness that felt like it was crushing my ribs. In 24 hours, I had lost my girlfriend, my best friend, and my sense of safety. I was completely alone, stranded in the wreckage of a betrayal I never saw coming. The next 2 weeks passed in a gray, catatonic blur. I went to work, stared at my computer screen for 8 hours a day, and answered emails with robotic efficiency. My coworkers noticed the change, the dark circles under my eyes, the sudden weight loss, the way I stopped joining them for casual lunches or happy hour drinks. When my boss asked if everything was all right, I just told him I was dealing with a sudden family emergency. He nodded sympathetically and told me to take whatever time I needed, but I didn't want time. Time was my enemy. When I was busy, my mind was occupied, but the moment the clock hit 5 and I had to drive back to that empty apartment, the intrusive thoughts would return with a vengeance. Every corner of my place was haunted by their presence. I couldn't look at the couch without remembering Marcus sitting there, laughing at some joke on his phone. I couldn't step into the kitchen without smelling the ghostly aroma of that garlic herb chicken they had cooked together. I had stopped sleeping in my bedroom entirely. Instead, I dragged a spare blanket onto the floor of my small home office, curling up on the hardwood with my back against the wall, staring at the door until the sun came up. It was a pathetic existence, a holding pattern of pure survival. Chloe tried to contact me almost every single day. My phone would light up with long, frantic text messages filled with paragraphs of apologies, explanations, and pleas for just one conversation. It was a mistake, Liam. He manipulated me when I was feeling lonely. Please don't throw away 3 years over a moment of weakness. I still love you. I've always loved you. I didn't reply to a single one. Each message felt like a fresh slap in the face, a desperate attempt to rewrite history and minimize the absolute calculated cruelty of what she had done. Eventually, I blocked her number along with Marcus's. Marcus hadn't tried to text me as much, which somehow hurt even more. He sent one weak, cowardly email 3 days after the incident, asking if he could come by to pick up a few remaining items he'd left behind, like his favorite winter coat and some old college textbooks. I didn't reply to the email either. Instead, I gathered every single item he had left in my apartment, packed them into heavy-duty black trash bags, and drove them over to his sister's apartment in Lincoln Park. I dumped them on her front porch, rang the doorbell, and walked away before she could even open the door. I wanted no ties left. I wanted him entirely erased from my life. By the 3rd week, the crushing sadness began to harden into something else, a cold, calculated desire for clarity. The shock had worn off, leaving behind a sharp, analytical focus. I needed to understand exactly how deep the deception went. I knew Chloe's laptop password. We had shared everything, or so I thought. One evening, sitting on the office floor in the dim light of the city street lamps outside, I opened my laptop and logged into our shared digital cloud storage account, looking for any trace of what had been happening behind my back. What I found broke me all over again, but in a completely different way. It wasn't just a 2-week fling born out of a drunken mistake. It was a digital paper trail of a full-blown romance that had been thriving right under my roof for nearly 2 months. There were shared photo albums from days when I was pulling those 12-hour shifts at the firm. Photos of them taking casual day trips to the lakefront, smiling into the camera, looking like a happy, normal couple. There were screenshots of text messages they had saved, inside jokes, plans for when I would be out of town on business, and expressions of affection that Chloe hadn't used with me in over a year. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. Every time I had come home exhausted, feeling guilty for not being a better boyfriend or a more attentive friend, they were laughing at my expense.
Every time Chloe told me she was glad she was keeping Marcus company, it was a calculated move to spend more time with him in my own living room. The sheer level of sociopathic deception required to look me in the eye every single day, to kiss me goodbye in the morning, and then welcome my best friend into our bed the moment the door clicked shut, was beyond my comprehension. I sat there in the dark, the blue light of the laptop screen reflecting off my face, feeling a dangerous, icy calm settle over me. The grief was gone, burned away by a profound sense of self-preservation. I realized then that I could never fix this, and more importantly, I didn't want to. They deserved each other. They deserved the toxic, guilt-ridden foundation they had built their relationship on. But I wasn't going to let them control the narrative.
I knew how these things went. Eventually, they would tell their mutual friends some twisted version of the story where I was the distant workaholic boyfriend who drove them into each other's arms. I downloaded every single piece of evidence from the cloud, the photos, the text logs, the timestamps that proved exactly when and where the betrayal had taken place. I saved them into a secure file on my hard drive, labeled simply with the date of that rainy Tuesday night. I didn't post them online, and I didn't send them to our friends. Not yet. I just wanted the truth locked away, an insurance policy against their inevitable lies. The next morning, I called my landlord. I told him I needed to break my lease early, offering to forfeit my security deposit and pay the 2-month penalty fee just to get out of that brick building. He was surprised, but agreed when he heard the absolute finality in my voice. I spent the rest of the weekend packing my life into cardboard boxes, throwing away anything that reminded me of the last 3 years. The vanilla candles, the framed photos from our trips to Michigan, the extra keys, everything went straight into the dumpster behind the alley. On my final night in the apartment, the rain returned, casting the same familiar thrumming sound against the windows. I stood in the empty living room, my suitcase by my side, looking at the bare hardwood where Marcus's couch used to sit. The space felt enormous now, stripped of the warmth and memories I had spent years building. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an unknown number, but I knew the area code. I hesitated for a long moment before finally sliding the screen to answer, curiosity overcoming my resolve. "Liam, please don't hang up." Chloe's voice came through the speaker, sounding small, exhausted, and utterly broken. "Marcus and we tried to talk, but it's over. He left town. I ruin everything, Liam. I just need to see you. Just 5 minutes." I took a deep, steady breath, feeling the cool air fill my lungs. For the first time in 3 weeks, my heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I looked around the empty apartment, realizing that her voice no longer held any power over me. She was just a ghost trying to haunt a house that was already abandoned. I stayed silent for what felt like an eternity, listening to the faint sound of her ragged breathing on the other end of the line. A few weeks ago, the sound of her crying would have torn my chest wide open, sending me into a spiral of desperation to fix whatever was hurting her. Now, it just sounded like empty noise. The illusion of the woman I thought I knew had been completely shattered, and no amount of tears could piece those jagged fragments back together. "There's nothing left to see, Chloe," I said, my voice remarkably steady, carrying a quiet finality that seemed to surprise even her. "I'm standing in an empty apartment. I've packed my things, broke the lease, and I'm leaving the city tonight. Whatever you and Marcus have to figure out, you're going to have to do it without me." "You're leaving?" she gasped, her voice cracking into a sob. "Liam, please, you can't just disappear. We can go to therapy, we can talk through this. What Marcus and I did, it was a horrific mistake, but I love you. I've always loved you. You can't just throw away 3 years of our lives like they meant nothing." "I'm not the one who threw them away," I replied calmly. "You did that when you brought my best friend into our bed. You did that every single day you looked me in the eye and lied to me while I was working myself to the bone to build a future for us. You didn't just make a mistake, Chloe. You made a choice. Hundreds of choices, every single day, for 2 months." There was a long pause on the line, the weight of my words finally sinking through her desperation. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its frantic edge,
sounding hollow and defeated. "Where are you going?" "It doesn't matter," I said, and for the first time, I genuinely meant it. "Don't call this number again. I'm changing it tomorrow. Goodbye, Chloe." Before she could respond, I pressed the red button on the screen, ending the call. I took a deep, shuddering breath, feeling a massive, invisible weight lift off my shoulders. I took the SIM card out of the phone, snapped it in half, and dropped it into the empty kitchen sink.
It felt incredibly liberating to cut the final digital thread tying me to the wreckage of my past life. I grabbed the handle of my large rolling suitcase, slung my duffel bag over my shoulder, and took one last look around apartment 3B. The bare walls looked cold in the dim light of the hallway, stripped of the art prints we had picked out together and the shelves that used to hold our favorite books. This place had been the backdrop for the worst night of my life, but as I stood there in the quiet, I realized it no longer defined me. The betrayal had happened, it had altered the trajectory of my life completely, but it wasn't going to destroy me. I walked out into the hallway, pulling the heavy doors shut behind me. The sound of the deadbolt clicking into place echoed through the stairwell like a final, definitive period at the end of a long, painful chapter. The drive out of Chicago was surreal. The rain had slowed to a mist, the glowing orange streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement of the interstate as I headed east toward Indiana. I didn't have a concrete plan, just a temporary rental house lined up near the coast in North Carolina and a remote consulting position my firm had agreed to let me transition into. I needed space. I needed a completely blank canvas where the names Marcus and Chloe held absolutely no meaning. As the city skyline slowly faded into the distance in my rearview mirror, a profound sense of calm washed over me. The anger and bitterness were still there, locked away in a quiet corner of my mind, but they no longer consumed me. Trusting people again would be a long, steep climb. The scars left by a best friend and a partner working together to deceive you don't just disappear overnight. But as the tires hummed against the highway asphalt and the open road stretched out into the dark before me, I realized something incredibly important. They had taken my relationship, they had taken my friendship, and they had taken my home, but they hadn't taken my future. That belonged completely to me.